Of all antiquity, ancient Greece is often held up as the most magnificent advanced culture of old, with an innate talent for art and a flair for storytelling. So celebrated is the art of ancient Greece that copies began to emerge of Greek statuary even while the civilization still stood. The more popular the sculpture, the more copies were made, making it difficult to distinguish the copies from the original. One of the most popular forms of reproduction was plaster casting, a technique developed in ancient Egypt and used by both the ancient Greeks and Romans. After museums became more interested in original works, plaster casts were seen as disposable, as mere replicas of greater, authentic artworks. At one time, however, there was a huge interest in collecting these casts, and this relief is one of a huge collection donated to Beloit College in 1894. This plaster cast depicts a moment from the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and the original, dating from around 480 BC, is one of the most celebrated works of classical Greek sculpture. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice was told by many ancient poets, including Virgil and Ovid. Orpheus, the son of Apollo and muse of Calliope, was the god of music and was famous for his power to be able to tame any god or creature with his lyre. Orpheus's main motivation in life was his wife, the beautiful nymph Eurydice, whom he loved with all his being. After Eurydice was killed by a serpent's bite, he began playing sorrowful music to express his grief. He journeyed to the underworld to seek Eurydice and used his lyre to soften the hearts of Hades and Persephone, rulers of the underworld. They allowed him to take his wife back to earth under one condition. Orpheus could not look back until he left the underworld and reached the light of day. Hermes, messenger to the gods and guide to the underworld, led them to the surface. Once Orpheus came out of the darkness, he turned back to see Eurydice, but she had yet to reach the surface and was lost to the world of the living forever. The relief depicts this last moment between Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus, the figure on the right, looks into Eurydice's eyes one last time, as Hermes, on the left, leads her by hand back to the underworld. This work stylistically exemplifies some of the characteristics of classical Greek statuary. The intricate drapery of the clothing is an iconic element of classical statuary, and the figures stand in the naturalized contrapposto stance. Although the relief depicts a climactic moment of a dramatic story, the faces show little emotion, no grief or surprise. During this period, it was typical to see expressionless faces in Greek sculpture, as a more moderate style was popular. It is important in analyzing the formal elements of this relief to keep in mind that this is a plaster cast. Similar to looking at photographs of paintings, a cast can merely attempt to capture the detail of the original. Reproductions of images can be problematic. Do we view this plaster cast as a work of art unto itself, or is it primarily a representation of the original that it was cast from? Any analysis we give to this work must account for the fact that it is a reproduction of an ancient sculpture. However, plaster casts are interesting and valuable in their own right, and they provide an opportunity for those who might not be able to travel all the way to Naples to see a near-perfect replica of a Greek masterpiece. As for the creator of this work, John Pickard, a writer for the American Journal of Archaeology, concludes that the relief was most likely made by an anonymous, skillful artist not long after the creation of the Parthenon frieze in the 5th century BC. Pickard compares the arguments made by historians Wolters and Furtwängler, who disagree with each other in terms of the style of the relief, which could eventually determine its date and perhaps artist. Furtwängler compares the style of the relief to a statue of Hephaestus' torso, speculated to be made by the Greek artist Alcamenes, citing that the details of the two statues are surprisingly similar to each other. He concludes that the Orpheus relief, too, could be made by Alcamenes or someone working closely with him. Pickard disagrees with Furtwängler, saying that the artists working in the style of Alcamenes had a distinct individuality and style that is not present in the relief of Orpheus and Eurydice. Pickard sides with Wolters, who states that the relief was made in the Attic style and heavily influenced by the Parthenon frieze. The profile of the heads, the higher placement of the relatively small ears, and the style of the figure's chiton, the draped garments they wear, are all similar in style to the Parthenon frieze. Eurydice's posture and the deep folds of her diploidion, the chiton for Greek women, are also similar to the sculpture of the priest from the East Frieze. Considering these comparisons, Pickard concludes that the relief must have been made by an unknown but highly trained sculptor mimicking the style of the Parthenon frieze. The Orpheus and Eurydice cast is a part of a larger collection of plaster casts donated by the Greek government to the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago, also known as the World's Fair. The casts were made for the sole purpose of the exposition, with the intent to represent a range of classical statuary from Greek antiquity. The relief is just one example of the many copies of Greco-Roman art and architecture at the fair. In 1894, philanthropist Helen Brace Emerson worked with Professor Lucius Fisher to purchase 125 of the casts for Beloit College's permanent collection. This collection, along with other works donated from Helen Brace Emerson's personal collection, became a foundation for the Wright Museum of Art and Beloit's art programs. These casts represent classical Greek statuary, the grandeur of the World's Columbian Exposition, and a pivotal point in the history of Beloit College.